we're back live. Welcome to the Intelligence Assessment with Kevin Shipp. I am so pleased to have Kevin with me here tonight. How's it going, Kev?
Going good, Jason. Good to be with you.
Very good, very good. Just want to make sure that our stream is working. This is a Patreon-only stream, and I definitely want to thank all of our generous Patreon sponsors, people who will be watching this right now on patreon.com/Kevin_Shipp with 2 P's, or on patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth. And if you're seeing it somewhere else, you're not helping the cause. So tonight, Kevin has prepared a really comprehensive presentation for us, and he's going to detail Operation Mockingbird and Operation Mockingbird 2.0. Isn't that right, Kevin?
That's correct, yes.
Take it away.
Well, Jason, Operation Mockingbird supposedly was terminated in 1976 by George H.W. Bush after the family jewels came out from William Colby. I'll talk about that in a second. So the question is, did Operation Mockingbird really go away, or is there a new variation that's going on today? And I think we'll find the answer to that question in the affirmative as we go on. Yes, Operation Mockingbird is going on today. Really, it never ended. Allegedly, they stopped paying journalists, and through a series of pretty creative means, journalists are still working in connection with the CIA without being directly paid by them as they were in 1976. Let's start out, Jason, and feel free, of course, to jump in with any questions that you have as we go on. This all started with the Church Committee, and the Church Committee was investigating some of the CIA's dirty deeds that it had done, and they had come out. They convened the usual Congressional Investigation Committee to examine that, and they were focusing on Operation Phoenix, where the CIA had gone in and executed about 40,000 Vietnamese citizens, and that had come out. Everybody was pretty shocked by that. They were using special assassination weapons to do that and things. In the context of that, all of a sudden, Operation Mockingbird pops up, and William Colby, who I met when I was on the 7th floor, a real gentleman, actually. William Colby testified before the Church Committee and became really quite open, more than just about any other director, about what the CIA had been doing during that time period, and brought out the existence of Operation Mockingbird. It was unexpected. No one knew that Mockingbird existed until Colby started revealing it. So it was quite shocking. The problem was, if you watched the Church Committee, as sadly many congressional investigations do, the testimony on Operation Mockingbird was whitewashed, essentially covered up. Colby got into some detail, and it was quite extensive, that how the agency had penetrated the news media. But of course, the old claim was made, well, we can't go into any more detail about this because it's classified. And usually it's that classified wall that keeps the information from the American people that they may want to know, like their news media being manipulated. So they claimed it was too classified. They wouldn't reveal the list of the names and journalists involved in Operation Mockingbird, but it was about 3,000 CIA contractors involved in it and employees. I think it was about 300 major news media outlets that were being fed information by the CIA to disseminate to the public. So it was quite shocking. And it was George H.W. Bush who allegedly terminated the program. And at the time, he was the director of the Council on Foreign Relations. We'll talk about their media connections later. So that leads us up today. And I'll talk a little bit about Colby because he was eventually killed. In my opinion, the evidence indicates that he was murdered. And we'll talk about that here in a moment. Any questions you have so far, Jason?
Well, more of a comment and sort of a question, Kevin. You know, yesterday Charles Ortel and I had a guest on Charles's show, Closing In, and of course, that was Tom Lipscomb. I don't know if you've had a chance to see that episode yet, but I was quite surprised to learn that Tom was a member of the Council on Foreign Relations, which I always thought was kind of not my kind of organization. And Tom said that it had never been proven that Operation Mockingbird actually existed. So if you haven't seen that episode, I'd love for you to take a look at it and give us some feedback possibly next week.
Sure, I'd be glad to, and I can't. It surprises me he'd make that claim because that couldn't be farther from the truth. The documents are there that it did indeed exist. The extent of it was never gotten into. They just didn't dig deep enough, as happens quite a bit. So I got to disagree with that. Well, and I'll explain why as we go on.
Very good.
I want to talk a little bit about William Colby because he revealed what they called the family jewels to the church committee and went into some of the deep and dark things that the CIA had been involved in, from MK Ultra up to the Phoenix program, which the news media refused to cover, by the way. One evening, former Director Colby was at his house on the river, kind of his little retreat. He had just called his wife and said he'd worked on the sailboat all day. He was tired. He was going to go to bed just after the call. He never called her back. He never showed up in D.C. the next day. And they found his canoe floating down the river. Well, actually, when they found the canoe, it was buried with sand on a sandbar, completely full of sand by itself. They couldn't find Colby's body. About 100 investigators drug the river, couldn't find anything. 9 days later, Colby's body winds up face down in the water next to where the canoe was. And it had not been submerged. It was 2 or 3 days. It showed the body had been there, not 9 days. So it was, I think, and there's a lot of other evidence we can go into when we have time in another program. Colby had come out and revealed the existence of a lot of CIA family jewels, and a lot of CIA people did not want out and were extremely angry with him. And Colby had just come out in an article in the Dallas Morning News and advised, there's some folks inside the agency, some loyalists. He had just advised that someone had an overhead reconnaissance videotape of Waco, Texas, showing that the feds fired first, not the people in the compound. So Colby had and I think it was just a matter of about a month after that, he was found dead, laying on the sandbar where his canoe was found. So there are a lot of suspicions on his death related to this. And I want to talk about this real quickly, too. Conspiracy theories. That is an old CIA trick, and it has been passed on to the news media. If somebody is doing any investigation, JFK is a prime example. This is a dispatch I'm showing on the screen put out by the CIA telling its station chiefs, if anybody questions the government narrative on the JFK assassination, just call it a conspiracy theory and basically tear down their credibility. Well, I think everybody knows we're seeing that thrown around today against every journalistic investigation, especially on JFK, that's being done. But the term conspiracy theorist and conspiracy theory was invented by the CIA to cover some of its actions. This is the actual FOIA memo right here that you're seeing on your screen. And actually, viewers can go out, they can Google that, find that, and read the square that I've highlighted at the bottom there where it says that's quite interesting. So I'm going to the slide here with the control process that the CIA uses. Now, we're talking today. I had a personal experience, a Mockingbird experience, which I'll talk about later when I came out with my book and went to the Washington Post. I call it the Mockingbird paper. But what the agency does, it's done this with Amazon, it's done this with other corporations. It'll approach these companies and offer them million-dollar contracts. Amazon took a $600 million contract with the CIA. It'll offer them million-dollar contracts, a deal that they can't refuse, or journalists. It'll offer them some coverage, some information that the CIA feeds them that they can't refuse, or especially if it's a classified program, the lure of being a spy will get a lot of journalists to kind of jump in. And if it is a classified program, or even close, they'll have, for example, these CEOs of companies that get these contracts, they'll have them sign a CIA secrecy oath binding them to silence regarding that program. And I'm sure probably some folks in Amazon or et cetera sign that agreement. Once that agreement is signed, essentially, I know because I signed one, the CIA owns them, and they are bound by that agreement not to talk about that relationship or what they're doing to anyone. And of course, the fear there is prison or fines or other things. And that's so they get a hold of journalists like that currently these days.
I imagine people would also fear that final canoe trip, Kevin.
I think so. Yes, yes. We've kind of been concerned about a couple of those ourselves, except I don't canoe, thank God. And this studio that you're looking at now, we're deep down in the woods, and we built and created this studio, kind of down where you can't even see it on Google Earth. We're doing our best to kind of stay breathing. I want to mention that the CIA now today has what's called the CIA Media, quote unquote, Media Relations Office. Now, whenever the CIA talks about media relations, that is CIA manipulation relations of the news media. The CIA's number one goal, and I know I was in there, is its own survival at all costs. The CIA will do whatever it has to do to stay in existence, lie to Congress, cover up, completely destroy whistleblowers, whatever it has to do. So the CIA has a desk officer called a liaison officer for every single major news media outlet that's out there, NBC, CBS, CNN, and the rest of them. The CIA's got an officer that works with those outlets to essentially feed them information for them to publish. That is what the agency wants them to put out to the public. The CIA also has a liaison office for Hollywood. And that person works with Hollywood either to threaten them regarding information that shouldn't be in a movie, or in the case of a couple of movies, actually give them classified information to make the CIA look good in that movie. Argo, the movie, was a great movie, but it was a complete fabrication. The CIA liaison office, and I'll show you the connections of Hollywood to the CIA a little bit later here. Actors like Robert De Niro are one of their honorary boards of the Spy Museum and other things. I guess hence his hatred for Donald Trump. But the CIA will also issue press releases today to the news media, and the news media will not question those press releases. They will just publish them, basically talking points from the CIA, what the CIA wants to go to the public. That's today. That's happening today. Now, what the CIA claims on another front is, well, the information that is affecting the U.S. news media and what's being reported, they call it, quote unquote, well, it's foreign fallout. Because the CIA admits that they have disinformation programs in many foreign countries. And those disinformation articles fed through those journalists, excuse me, come back through the Associated Press, international reporting, back to the U.S. And most U.S. news outlets pick up AP and then publish it in their papers, and they get what the CIA planted overseas. So Mockingbird is kind of a boomerang that goes out and comes back to the U.S. media in that regard. And finally, and this is the one that I try to drive home the most, is the fear factor. A lot of the press, a lot of journalists, if not many Americans, are afraid of the CIA. They're afraid to say anything about the CIA. They're afraid to say anything to blow the whistle on the CIA. The level of fear out there for the CIA is just remarkable. And in a democratic society, a constitutional government, if there's an agency that the people are afraid of or fear, we have a problem. So that's a breakdown of kind of how it's working today. Now, you talked about the Council on Foreign Relations. It is an extensive organization, but I have to tell you, if you go to the Council on Foreign Relations slide, I want you to see this is the Council on Foreign Relations today. Now, we know that it was formed in 1921, and on the board in 1921 was Philip and Catherine Graham, the owners of the Washington Post, connected to Allen Dulles and the CIA, regularly fed information from the CIA to put into the press. The other lines that I'm showing you here on this slide are current connections either on the board of the Council on Foreign Relations or former members of the board on the Council on Foreign Relations or current members. Current members, on the left, of course, you got George H.W. Bush. You've got the chilling Dick Cheney. You've got Tom Brokaw, who is currently on the board of directors, and we know that a famous media figure. CNN, Fareed Zakaria, CNN reporter, is a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. We have to remember that the Council on Foreign Relations is the policy-making arm of the CIA and the U.S. government that basically sets what the intelligence community is going to do overseas. A lot of that comes out of meetings and findings from the Council on Foreign Relations. They are not elected. Much of it is done in secret. And CIA operations come out of these things. Nobody votes on them. Congress doesn't vote on them. And that is the chilling part about the Council on Foreign Relations. I'd encourage people to check that out. I disagree with your foreign guest. I think this is a policy arm of the U.S. government involved in intelligence. If you look over to the right, Erin Burnett, CNN correspondent, very talented lady, member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Up to the right, you can see John Brennan speaking before the CFR. We all know now that Brennan was behind a soft coup against President Trump, and that's a whole other discussion we'll probably have. Brennan has a dark past. A couple of people died or were killed investigating him, and we'll get into that one evening. But look at the bottom. You got J.P. Morgan Chase and Goldman Sachs, powerful members of the Council on Foreign Relations, setting intelligence foreign policy for operations overseas. Unelected, not voted for, no control of Congress.
Wow. You know, Kevin, earlier today I had a show with a Hollywood insider, a screenwriter named Tiffany Fitzhenry. And Tiffany shared with me some really troubling information about some sexual harassment that she's experienced in Hollywood. But she also told me something I didn't know before. She's actually a particular expert in the area of the CIA intervening in Hollywood productions and how they go about doing that. So she's a really great new contact, and perhaps in the future we can have her on the intelligence assessment as a guest to talk about some of these topics.
You bet. Good for her. Good for her. That's guts. I like it. Great. Yeah, be good to do that.
Yeah.
Okay. So, and the point I'm making is, everybody wonders why is the media doing what they're doing? We know they're lying. They're twisting stories. They're lying by omission. CNN comes right out. I've been watching them even when I was traveling overseas. They come right out and lie about stories. What on earth is going on? Everybody, I'm sure everybody in this listening audience, and hopefully the new people, know there's something wrong with the U.S. news media, the major news media players, and there is. Their gut feeling, and what's more than their gut feeling, you see it on the TV screen. There is currently, it's been around for decades, it's still there. There is a hidden agreement. I've witnessed this myself. The senior editors of most major newspapers and news programs still today have kind of an editor's agreement with the CIA not to reveal any secrets or dig too deep into the CIA. You just don't do that. That hidden kind of unspoken agreement is still there. And ask yourself, how many investigative journalists reporting on the CIA have you seen in the last couple of decades, really digging down? Well, none. There is an agreement between the CIA. I'll talk about my personal experience with this. There's an agreement with the CIA. Do not touch CIA whistleblowers. Ignore them. Don't take their story and don't interview them. Have you ever seen a CIA whistleblower on CNN, MSNBC, or, sad to say, even Fox News? And I think they may be a little wary because of a past problem. But Fox is probably the only one that I'll watch. Anyway, these editors are basically, it's made clear you don't talk to whistleblowers. If you do, you lose your access to CIA, what we're feeding you. A good example, if your viewers, and I like to put these slides up because I don't want to be just a talking head. I want people to be able to see what I'm talking about too with their own eyes, and they can pick up things they can go out and research themselves if they want to. A prime example is Al McCoy did a very, very good investigative report on the CIA and their drug running, something that the CIA will do anything to keep from getting in the public. Sadly, for them, the truth has a way of getting out. Al McCoy did a tremendous report on the CIA running drugs. His phones were tapped, been there. They did an IRS audit on him, been there. His sources were coerced to change their stories. Very similar to Gary Webb, whose life they systematically destroyed until he was found with 2 bullets in his head in his room. So that's one of the ways that the agency, especially, the NSA does not work like the CIA does. The CIA is a PSYOP, an operational arm of the government. The NSA are the kind of the ears of the government, and we'll do a program probably on them later. So the CIA pressures the news media pretty heavily to report what they want. And there's a book written by Douglas Valentine, well worth reading, I think. And he gets into this. As a matter of fact, he's the closest I think that anyone has gotten, a journalist has gotten. And he got a lot of his information directly from interviews with none other than William Colby. I think at the end of his life, Colby wanted to kind of make amends for what he did, and he began even talking to Douglas Valentine. Some good interviews in there. So this is a political warfare by the CIA against the American press. And if you try to manipulate the American press, you're manipulating Americans. They're still doing this today. It hasn't stopped. It hasn't gone away. It's just gotten more crafty. It's a counter-subversive op, similar to something they do in a foreign country to manipulate public opinion. So the news media, if you haven't noticed, I got frustrated with Fox News. We'd watch Bill O'Reilly and others, and they would some scandals were coming out with the CIA on other outlets, and they just would not touch the CIA and would not report negatively about the CIA, and I always found that kind of concerning. Then we've got now 6 major news media conglomerates that control about 90% of what we read, what we see, and what we hear in the news, and even in movies. That's about 20 CEOs that are controlling the news that's coming in to the American people, and a lot of those folks are kind of the good old boy network connected still to the CIA. And we'll get into Hollywood a little bit later. I'm glad to hear what your guest had to say. But the news media will ignore CIA violations and will not report on it, and this is why. What most people, I don't think, know is a lot of news programs, even so-called independent news programs, are taking money from billionaires and foundations that are actually behind the scenes controlled by the CIA. So they're indirectly taking CIA money. And sadly, The Intercept with Glenn Greenwald is one of those. And Democracy Now! With Amy Goodman is another that receives a lot of money from these so-called foundations. So
that's very interesting. I'm sorry to interject, Kevin,
yeah, sure.
but
No
I've run into Amy Goodman of Democracy Now! A few times around New York City, and the first time I saw her was outside the Michael Moore film. I think it was called Trumpland, and I had just started Crowdsource the Truth. I saw Amy Goodman and I stopped her and I said, Amy, I'm a fellow Goodman, let's have a chat. I've developed this open source fact-checking truth engine, and she literally turned on her heels and walked away from me.
Now I guess now maybe we know why. Hey, by the way, my mom's maiden name was Goodman too. So hey brother, maybe
there we go.
Like,
yeah.
We were like co-cribs or something in the baby unit in the hospital.
Yep.
Anyway, so yeah, but Amy Goodman is taking money from some of these foundations, and I got a lot of respect for Glenn Greenwald, but The Intercept and others are too. So you can see how the CIA weasels its way, and I think some journalists don't even realize who's behind the money they're getting. The CIA is complex, and they're good. They've been at this for almost 6 decades, so they're good at what they do. If you've noticed, most of the mainstream media editors and elites are pretty hardcore leftists. They lean to the left. Duh. I think most of us know that. And those are old CIA connected editors. Believe it or not, a lot of the CIA is very left-leaning. It has gone all the way back to Alan Dulles, who was connected directly to the Third Reich. We'll have to do a program on Alan Dulles. He was a pretty dark character. But the CIA historically has been driven by oil companies, wealthy elite businessmen, and bankers who, for example, want to get control of the oil and natural resources in that country. They staged 80 coups, overturned several democratically elected governments. That started in Iran. They overturned a Iranian government because they wanted, with the British, to get the oil and gas. And that resulted in the Shah and in the takeover, and the government we have now essentially is a result of a botched CIA operation. So they have friends in the media, and if a journalist, and you can just kind of see this from the reporting that we've seen, if a journalist dares to do an investigative report on the CIA, they will be silenced and shut down by their editors, and if they press further, that's the end of their career. Now, in a nation with freedom of the press, of course, that's concerning. And Hollywood promotion, Zero Dark 30, there was false information in there, making the CIA look like a James Bond kind of outfit. And that's what they do. They want themselves to look good. They don't want to talk about the murders. They don't want to talk about the coups, the drug running. Sadly, I wish they were like James Bond. I was in that side of the house, and unfortunately, they aren't. And I know we're kind of pressed for time, Jason, but anything that you want to add?
Well, I was just going to add that Zero Dark 30 was produced by Annapurna Pictures, a company owned by the daughter of Larry Ellison, the guy who started Oracle and I think is the fifth wealthiest man, at least in America. And also Oracle, as I understand it, has taken over this cloud data services contract for the CIA. So possibly that's an interesting tidbit.
I cannot confirm or deny that, but yes, that's true. And now Google. Let's talk about Google. They've gotten questions. Well, didn't the CIA start Google? And Google says no, that we did not start from the CIA. Well, that's true, and it's not true. It's basically not true. What the CIA and the NSA did is they started a research program on how to target individuals based on patterns and put them into groups for that sort of targeting. They contracted military industrial contractors to do the research, and they brought in scientists. And ironically, the program was called Birds of a Feather, targeting individuals that can be grouped together. The CIA brought in scientists, briefed them on what they wanted to do, and through the MDDS program, the CIA NSA funding program, they recruited and funded the researchers that developed Google and the Google platform, and Google became operational and up and running through CIA-funded research and CIA-funded researchers. So is Google's origin the CIA and the NSA? Yes, it is. Is the CIA running Google now? They say they're not, maybe not. So how are we looking on time,
Kevin,
my friend?
I just got an error from PowerPoint. It crashed. So give me just a moment to bring that back up. Perhaps the CIA is involved with Microsoft as well.
What a coincidence. Well, we could do a show on that. What a coincidence. Someone went in today, or somehow, who knows, and reset all of our Skype, disabled our speakers and everything today. It took us 2 hours to bring it back up. So welcome to our world.
Yeah, give me just 1 second and we will have this right back here. Just getting up to our current slide here. Sorry. Should be back with us. Okay.
Looks like it is.
There we go. Okay. Sorry about that.
No worries. Great. There are management level people in the news media that know how to stop a story. A good example is the Times Book Review. They manipulate that, and any books that they don't want out there, they will essentially stop it. The media will block interviews with authors like Douglas Valentine. The CIA and Organized Crime is a great book. I'd recommend it. Douglas Valentine did a remarkable job on that, but they've been blocking interviews from him coming on and discussing his actual investigative report on the CIA. So they'll block authors from coming on the shows. You ever seen Valentine on CNN? Do you think I'll ever get on CNN? Probably not, but I consider that a compliment. So this is, and I know we're kind of pushing for time here. When I wrote From the Company of Shadows and came out, I approached several well-known publishers, and they said, "Oh my goodness, what an incredible story! We'll take this to our board." They called back and said, "Well, you know, the story is great, but our board doesn't want to cross the CIA, so we don't want to publish a book against the CIA." Experienced that personally. I went to the Washington Post, actually came out at quite a bit of risk, and gave my story to the Washington Post. They sat on it for 30 days. The reporter called me repeatedly, trying to get me to tell him classified information, and then went straight to the CIA and advised the CIA that I'd come out, called them, and given them the story. His editor was none other than Bob Woodward, who I'd come out in my book, and with eyewitness evidence. Woodward claimed he got into CIA Director Casey's room and he admitted to Iran-Contra. That's false. I was one of the agents outside the room. Woodward never got in. We escorted him to the door. So Woodward was this reporter's editor, and I finally left the Washington Post and said, "Look, I know what you're doing." They published it on the front page the next day, whitewashed a lot of the information, and then the New York Times picked it up. My book came out. The CIA sent it back and blacked out entire swaths of information, a whole chapter that was unclassified. That's a violation of an executive order. CIA is forbidden from blacking things out that are not classified but are embarrassing. And there are some embarrassing things in my book. They blacked out things like the accounts of my family's poisoning, the doctor's diagnosis, the environmental studies, and other things in that chapter are all blacked out. None of it's classified. All of it is revealing a cover-up by the CIA. So they black things out with impunity. Books, especially that go out to the public, the CIA has full control of those, and they throw the secrecy agreement around the secrecy oath as a weapon instead of a protection. So I experienced that. When I came out, and a lot of authors, especially whistleblowers who have written books or tried to write books, have confronted this. They're not just fighting the CIA. The shock for me and others is that they're fighting the news media at the same time, because the news media is blocking their story also. And that was a real eye-opener for me that the Washington Post did that. And of course, since then, I've been studying Operation Mockingbird 2.0. Now I understand fully how that's happening and why it's going on. So what I did was I said, all right, so you want to play this game? I formed my own publishing company called Ascent Publishing LLC, wrote the book, published the book through Ascent LLC, built the code in there, which the CIA missed, and ran my own published book through the CIA, which they approved and put their stamp, their little blurb in front of the book. And I put a code in there exposing the blackouts they did that were illegal. So I had to fight and go around the system just to get the book out. You still with me, Jason?
Absolutely.
Okay. All right. Yeah, just interject anytime. I know I'm kind of on a roll here, but we're...
I'm letting you roll, my man.
All right, brother. Is it okay if we go over just a little bit?
This is your time to use as you choose, Kevin.
You are the man. All right. This is interesting. The International Spy Museum in Washington, D.C. It's worth going to see. It's pretty well done, and it's set up pretty nicely, and there's a lot of spy devices in there. Now, you know, when the agency lets a listening device go out to the public, well, it's no longer being used. But there's some interesting stuff in there. General Michael Hayden is the chief on the board of directors for the International Spy Museum. And I want you to look, our audience to look at the honorary board of directors. George Herbert Walker Bush, honorary board of director. George Tenet, we'll see his face all over the place with the media. Honorary board member, International Spy Museum. And then we get into, here we go, Hollywood. Robert De Niro is a member of the board of directors for the CIA-run International Spy Museum, or their kind of private arm. De Niro's on the board. Harrison Ford is on the board. David Ignatius of the Washington Post is an honorary board member of the CIA-sponsored International Spy Museum. John Negroponte, if you remember him, he's the one that wrote the ARB report covering up Benghazi. I got a copy of that, and it is absolute baloney. It was Negroponte who wrote that to protect Hillary Clinton. William Hurd, congressman, and sadly, this one broke my heart, Mandy Patinkin, who was in the movie Princess Bride. Remember that movie?
Absolutely love that movie.
Oh, it's one of my all-time favorites. It's a classic. Well, Mandy currently is on the honorary board of the International Spy Museum, and The Princess Bride, I think, is one of the greatest movies ever made. Anyway, but that just goes to show you the connection between the CIA intelligence community and Hollywood. It's a kissy, huggy, huggy kind of thing, and I guess now we know why Robert De Niro despises Donald Trump to the point of making himself look pretty ridiculous, cussing up on the stage.
You know, one other thing I'd like to say about Robert De Niro, Kevin, he, if I'm not mistaken, yes, he was in that film The Good Shepherd, which I think was all about the formation of the CIA, wasn't it?
Yes, it was. Yeah, and there's some interesting things in that movie for sure. Yeah, very interesting. So here we go, and let's look at the next one. I think you already got that up. The Sun Valley Conference. Probably not many people know about the Sun Valley Conference. It's held every year. It was held in 2018, and it's where all the biggies get together. All of these CEOs of the internet companies you see there, all the news and Hollywood producers get there, and they all kibosh and go back and forth and go to conferences and pat each other on the back and drink champagne and have this big event. Well, guess who the keynote speaker has been at the Sun Valley Conference several times? None other than former CIA director and, at the time, CIA director George Tenet. And wish we had some time to spend on George Tenet. He invoked the state's secrets privilege to shut down cases against the CIA more than any other director in CIA history, going all the way back to 1948. So he's kind of a dark character, but he is always showing up as a keynote speaker at the Sun Valley Conference. This is social media, Jason. These are Hollywood elites that go to this thing, and there is the CIA right in the mix, and they don't even bother to hide it. I mean, it's right out there in the open.
Good news, however, Kevin, I do not see Patreon on that list, which is part of the reason why we're here.
That's why we do this. That is the sole reason. I got so tired of being controlled and blocked, and our systems being brought down. And you, Jason, Agent Q, were the one that came up with this idea to block that from happening, and trolls and other things. And hats off to you, because it's beautiful.
Thank you. Do I still have you, Kevin? You look frozen. Kevin? Huh. Ooh.
Of the media news. This is a recent.
Hang
Did
on.
you see that?
Wait a minute. I just totally lost you for a moment right after you said hats off to me. Sorry. Take it back for a moment.
That's all right, man. They're not going to get to us, bro. I wanted to put this up at the end because this just came out. This is recent. This is a prime example. The mainstream media knows, as does the agency, that a picture's worth 1,000 words. And here we got Rudy Giuliani, who we all know has got the brass cojones, is coming out on the Trump campaign. So what do they have to do? They got to smear him. Well, what better way to smear somebody than with a picture? So what the reporter did was they stooped down, so Rudy had to look down at him, and they took this photograph and then published it. MSN did this. I watch MSN because I love to watch how they twist things, and sometimes I post those on Twitter. But what does Rudy look like in this picture, Jason?
He looks like a grumpy old man requiring help to walk.
Yes, exactly. Now, is he a grumpy old man requiring help to walk? No.
No, I've been very impressed with Rudy Giuliani over the past couple days. I will admit that he was acting a little wacky for a while, and I was obviously living in New York City when Rudy Giuliani was the mayor, and I think he did a good job as the mayor of New York City. He was very strong against organized crime and all that. I have some questions about Rudy Giuliani's role in 9/11, but I appreciate how he's taking on Robert Mueller. So I'm a little on the fence with Rudy Giuliani.
Well, I'd agree with you there, and God willing, we'll do a really good balanced program on 9/11. I'd like to do that because I have the same concerns as you do about Rudy's handling it, especially with some of the evidence after the towers came down. I think there's some issues there, and I don't want to get into his private life, but he's a pretty colorful fellow.
Right.
So we'll just leave it at that. But you can see here what they tried to do with this photograph, and I want our viewers to start analyzing, analyzing the media when they see these pictures, and I would encourage them to go to MSN News and watch how they twist and spin and change things. It's kind of fun. I read them every day, and it can be frustrating, but it's kind of fun. So I'd encourage people to do that and start to recognize these things and pick them out. You could make a hobby out of this, but it's certainly worth doing.
Yeah. Well, it's a fascinating look at it, Kevin. So basically, instead of directly manipulating the press, they have these confabs and these groups, and they get the big Hollywood stars. I mean, see, I feel like it's one of these things that's maybe obvious, but not so obvious until somebody like you actually lays it out like this. I mean, if somebody's working for CNN or whatever, getting paid $5 million a year, and somebody above that person says, hey, don't report on the Las Vegas shooting or whatever they don't want reported on, there's not a lot of people that are going to stand up to the person signing their $5 million check and tell them no.
Right. How about none? Yeah, you're right. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, look who CNN and MSNBC have as their anchors now, John Brennan and James Clapper. That'll tell you a lot, right? Two former nefarious directors of the CIA and National Intelligence. What a coincidence.
Kevin, Susan is asking on Discord, where sponsors of Crowdsource the Truth at $5 a month and up are able to live chat with us. She wants to know about RT, Russia Today. She feels they're talking about things that Fox won't mention.
That is absolutely true. RT is reporting on things that Fox won't talk about. Now, Fox, I don't want to knock Fox, but Fox has got some issues too. I think from 10 to 20%, excuse me, of Fox is owned by the Saudi prince. and I have never heard Fox do any sort of an investigative program on the CIA. I know Bill O'Reilly never touched it throughout his years. So I think there's some issues there for sure.
Is that
So
Al-Walid bin Talal, the prince?
I'm sorry.
Is it Al-Walid bin Talal, the Saudi prince that has ownership in Fox?
I believe so. Yes.
Wow.
Now, you got and the figure I heard was 20%. So you got 20% of stake in Fox News. You would think that that's going to affect their reporting a little bit, and I think sadly it does. And that's just the way that the news media works. Hats off to Sean Hannity. He's taken some risk lately, and I hats off to him. I really appreciate that. But every media outlet has been gotten to in some fashion.
Yeah. The dissenter is telling us through Discord that the Council on Foreign Relations is one of the main groups named by Carroll Quigley on Tragedy and Hope. Same with JP Morgan and Chase. Now, Kevin, Carroll Quigley is a name that I first heard during an interview with my friend Lee Stranahan, and Lee has told me that Quigley was a mentor to Bill Clinton. What do you know about Carroll Quigley?
I'm not familiar. I've never talked to him, never interviewed with him. So over to you on that one.
Okay, we'll find out some more. Maybe we'll get Lee Stranahan on in a future show to talk some more about Carroll Quigley. Call Me Fred is talking about the Smith-Munn Modernization Act in the National Defense Authorization Act that authorized funds and domestic propaganda in 2013, basically making it legal to use propaganda against the people of the United States. That's 5 years ago. I don't know if everyone is aware of that.
Yeah, that's absolutely correct. That was chilling. Of course, you didn't see that in the mainstream media for obvious reasons, but you doggone right. That gives the government the right to silence speech in the United States if they deem it a threat to national security. And they just kind of slipped that one in there.
Right. And dissenter is also saying that Al-Walid bin Talal owns most of Twitter.
Is that right? Well, there we go.
See, it's interesting.
Let me mention too that the 29 blacked out pages in the 9/11 report were clearly connections to Saudi Arabia, Saudi intelligence, which is basically the brother sister intelligence agency to the CIA, and they work together quite a bit. William Casey worked with the prince on some operations. So here we go.
That's really interesting, Kevin. I think one of the things that we're learning from this whole fraudulent Robert Mueller investigation is just how deeply embedded the CIA is with some of its foreign intelligence, allies like GCHQ.
Yeah.
And, then when we start talking about how, major worldwide international conglomerates like Google are also in the pocket of the CIA. I mean, the tentacles are so embedded and so long. That 28-page report that I believe came out of Bob Graham's Senate Intelligence Committee named specifically Prince Bandar bin Sultan as being a financier, and he and his wife had wired, I believe, $150,000 that was utilized by the hijackers. And
That's right.
I mean, when you read it, the logic of it is so obvious as to be self-evident. These 19 individuals had no history in the country, couldn't speak the language very well. I don't imagine that they would come and get, there's no record of them having high-paying jobs or anything like that. You go to a city like Miami or Los Angeles or, any city really, I don't even think you're going to be able to rent an apartment without a guarantor. And that document said that a third Saudi diplomat signed as the guarantor on the apartments these guys were renting. So clearly foreknowledge of the event. That right there.
Absolutely.
Devastating.
Absolutely. You're absolutely right. And that's all true. And guess who commanded that those 28, 29 pages be blacked out? It was George W. Bush who ordered them to black out those pages, and of course it was George W. Bush, despite the flight ban, flew the bin Laden family out of the country the next day. So yeah, I mean, there's just fish wrapped in paper all over that.
It's really terrible. And when we think about the relationship between Bill Clinton as the governor of Arkansas, George H.W. as the director of the CIA, the Iran-Contra operation that ran guns to cash to drugs back in through Mena Airport, we can start to see the outline of a decades-long plan where on a handshake, perhaps, Bill Clinton and H.W. Bush agreed on who would be president for the next 30 years. And it seems quite clear that Donald Trump has disrupted that plan, and that is why all of these entities that you're describing as having very clear connections to the CIA are so upset about the Donald Trump presidency.
Yes, and for Bill Clinton to be connected with George H.W. Bush like that, as they were, he would have to be read into some CIA programs, and I think most certainly he had CIA access with H.W. Bush back in MENA and Iran-Contra. So even though they portray themselves as arch physical enemies, now they're buddy-buddy. Yeah. You see them hugging and smiling in pictures. Well, they both were involved in that operation. They both had clearances. They both know the skeletons in the closet on each other. Now that they're the best of friends.
Right.
But yeah, that's how things work. They set up and they plan presidents, and any president that challenges them gets what we see Donald Trump is getting. He's actually, I get notes all the time, oh, you're just a Trump supporter. Look at the facts, people. Trump comes in there and he questions, challenges, and investigates the shadow government, the CIA and the FBI, and they mount a coup against a sitting president, falsify affidavits, and do something that will go down in history as the greatest scandal in this country to try to get Trump out of there. He is a direct threat to them placing the next president that they want in office. He's a direct threat to the CIA operations and NSA operations in the United States. He's a direct threat to the CIA's manipulation of Congress, which I talk about in another lecture. And they want to get rid of him without a doubt.
I would imagine they're quite fearful of an Ivanka Trump presidency. She's a very intelligent woman and certainly at an age where she's got a political future if she wants it. You know, Kevin, I'm a little confused by some of the things that Donald Trump has done. Just yesterday or today, he's issued some new sanctions against Russia in connection to this poisoning of Skripal, which most of the evidence seems to indicate couldn't possibly have been done by Russia. Why is Trump falling for something like that?
Pressure, deep state pressure. I think he's being pressured into doing that. And a lot of times, I've seen the CIA will lie to a president routinely. They've lied to many presidents in the past. And, you know, Trump is surrounded. The complexity of his job is incredible. I'm sure he's been fed a bunch of baloney about that. As a matter of fact, I'm convinced of that. You know, we got to watch President Trump like we watch everybody from a constitutional lens and never give up and never let any president off the hook in that regard. The Syrian missile attack, first one, I had a real problem with that. I thought there were indications that was kind of what's the right false flag, perhaps. I'm trying to find the right word. But if you look at that missile attack, there was no indication of sarin gas at all, or the responders would have been dead in a half an hour. That was a bunch of baloney. The missiles did not destroy the base. The planes were up and flying 24 hours later. And on and on we go. I had a problem with that, and I had to really wrestle with that, and still do. So we watch Trump like we watch every president, and we have to, because when people get in positions of power, they either conform to the system or they get taken out. The good indication for me is they're trying to take out Trump, which shows me that he must be overturning some rocks and some skeletons are coming out. So I think that's kind of the fruit of this thing that we're seeing.
Yeah. And, you know, Margot would like you to know, Kevin, that Mena, Arkansas is like our country's Silk Road. I don't disagree with that. Call Me Fred says that the documentary Loose Change shows that many of the 9/11 hijackers are still alive. I haven't evaluated that specific claim, and I know that Loose Change has gone through a lot of iterations, but early on, Loose Change had made some claims about 9/11 that I actually was able to prove to be incorrect, in part through my experience in visual effects. I think I've spoken about it on Crowdsource the Truth before, but they show a video clip which appears to show a plane flying in front of buildings in the distance in Brooklyn, but a section of the wing goes behind the buildings. Now, I identified that as a very typical anomaly that occurs with optical flow software, where a
Right.
technique called pixel vector motion analysis can run into errors and make those sort of spatial anomalies occur. And also the clip in question was slowed down in post-production. So very likely someone who doesn't know how to operate that visual effects software properly slowed that clip down, put it out on the internet. Maybe even the CIA did it in order to put false, disinformation out there, something they do very frequently. Isn't that correct?
Well, of course they do. I think we just talked about that, and 9/11 is so complex, and you've got, the wonderful thing that I am really encouraged by is the number of citizen journalists out there taking 9/11 apart, because the media is not taking it apart, and just like the JFK assassination, they accept the government narrative and just move on without checking any of the details. I have said, and I taught a couple of university classes on criminal justice, that there should have been and should be a criminal investigation of 9/11. If that was done, a whole new set of data and facts and evidence would come out. No criminal investigation has ever been done. Evidence was destroyed. The steel was removed starting the next day, and on and on and on we go. There are so many things that don't add up in 9/11. It's a complex issue. People are examining all sides, but I think that is the new freedom of the press. That is just encouraging to me that people are picking that apart, and some of the information they're putting out there is absolutely outstanding, because the government covered it up to the point where the 9/11 Commission report, some of it could have been written by a high school student or looked like it was written by a high school student, and they left things out that were absolutely ridiculous, either stupid or intentional, similar to the Warren Commission. And you're welcome to trust in government. There is none. But thank God for citizen journalists. And there's some great ones out there with some great information on 9/11.
Yeah. And Kevin, you just reminded me that when you were talking about the murder of William Colby, you mentioned the Dallas Morning News. Dallas Morning News, of course, was pivotal in the reporting of the JFK assassination, and that just causes me to think that they've been on this Mockingbird gravy train for quite a while.
Yeah, I think if you were to go down to a state newspaper, the Washington Post as a national Mockingbird paper, you go back to the Dallas Morning News, and you kind of got a state Mockingbird. They've been, since JFK and before, they've been in the same type of venue as these other folks, the same type of operation, sadly. Yeah.
Right. And Bado is asking for you to do a 9/11 show soon. I mean, it's August, so certainly 1 month from today, we will be digging into 9/11, and maybe we can get some, you and I can talk offline about who might be some good guests to get on to do a 9/11 show.
Let's do it. I guess maybe this isn't a compliment. Infamous. I'm probably the only CI officer that's come out and said I don't think the 9/11 Commission report was accurate or even honest. So yeah, I think we should do that and approach it in a very balanced kind of criminal investigation way. I think that would be a good service to do to the public out there.
Absolutely. Well, listen, Kevin, I really appreciate the information that you've brought out here. I think in a future show we should explore what I've dubbed Operation Mocking Tube. I think it falls under the umbrella of Mockingbird 2.0, but that is the resistance that I and other YouTubers have personally experienced, most notably Quinn Michaels, who I definitely want to get you together with. Some of the stuff that you've said about this cloud that the CIA is creating. You hit me like a brick wall when you said that they're using it to create an artificial intelligence that will predict human behavior.
That's
Quinn's
right.
research has led him to believe that the worldwide network of particle colliders, coupled with the neutrino communications network that's being developed and tested between Fermilabs outside of Chicago and the deep underground neutrino experiment in Leeds, South Dakota, could be used to make a planet-scale quantum computer that would be used to run this artificial intelligence.
Fascinating stuff.
Yeah, and it's interesting, while we're talking, the same people who I'm talking about, who I believe participate in this mocking tube operation and have doxed my phone number and Skype account all over the place, the Skype is ringing off the hook. Typically during the day, nobody calls me on Skype.
Yeah, welcome to our world. When we were setting up the studio for the broadcast this evening, someone turned the mic off in my computer, so we weren't getting audio in Skype. The switches had been changed in the settings on Skype, and it took us 2 hours to bring that. That has never happened before. So, and of course, we know that we verified our phones are bugged through a senior official. So, I consider all of that a compliment. It just
Yeah.
shows that we're hovering over the target. They can't touch us, but what they can do is try to threaten and intimidate and scare. Well, we don't scare, so they got a problem with that. So they just keep picking on us.
Right. And on Monday, Kevin, I went to see Mary and Charlie Strange, the parents of Michael Strange, one of the people who was killed aboard Extortion 17
Yeah,
when it crashed in Afghanistan. So many anomalies about the operation of that flight. 7 Afghani soldiers on board who were not on the flight manifest, totally outside of military procedure. Michael was observed through an infrared camera alive on the ground for 15 minutes, no responders. And his stepmother, Mary, detailed to me how when they received a folder that contained a 20 to 30 page printed report, which, by the way, was virtually illegible, there was also a disk inside the folder. And I presume she meant a CD-ROM. I'm going to follow up with them and get some more details about this, but she described how she put it into their home computer and presented with a puzzle-type game that she had to solve that took her over 6 hours to figure out. And upon solving the game, over 1,300 pages of typed documents were revealed, and she printed them out and gave them to Donald Trump. Now, the interesting thing is, during our interview, I had set up all the cameras to get close-ups of the Strange family and myself and a wide shot, and we had Larry Klayman on Skype. The moment Mary and I start discussing how she decoded this encrypted message, all cameras froze and cut out. And I had to pull my normal cell phone, which I never use as a camera anymore because all these incoming Skype calls knock out the broadcast. I had to pull that out and use that as a camera, and the interview proceeded with just one camera.
yeah, yeah. That is no surprise. They're doing that sort of. We verified, we've proven that. There's no question about that they're doing this, and which is why we got on Patreon to kind of at least make it more difficult for them to do that. They don't want our message out. Our house has been broken into twice, and we've been into that before. We've been followed, bugged, and on and on and on it goes. And as I said, I consider that a compliment. We're over the target. You're over the target. A lot of the citizen journalists are over the target, and I say stay on the target, man. Don't let them. We're not going to let them intimidate us. We're going to keep reporting this stuff. They can keep fooling around with us all they want.
Yep.
You got to wonder about these people behind the switches. A little nutty, narcissistic, or stupid, or careerist, whatever motivates them to do this sort of thing to American people. It's just, but we've seen what the shadow government does. It's its nature. It's the nature of the people that work for it, have signed these agreements, bound by these oaths, terrified to do anything else, and on and on and on it goes. So it's no surprise, and we can probably, Jason, you and I, I'm sure, expect more of this. I've been having this happen to me for 15 years now.
Wow.
And they've even been doing it to my wife, and she never even worked. And I have to say, I wouldn't mess with my wife. She's pretty
Yes,
pissed off.
she's a tough lady, for sure.
She's a tough lady. And I wouldn't come on our property unannounced either. But that's one of the reasons I
definitely
love
not.
her. But they're doing it to her too. So it's a compliment.
Absolutely. Well, Kevin, it's been another really fascinating intelligence assessment. This is really a great segment here on Crowdsource the Truth. And of course, people are also enjoying it on patreon.com/Kevin_ship with 2 P's. And if people are watching on Crowdsource the Truth, I hope you'll consider sponsoring Kevin on Patreon as well. He and I are going to be working to add some unique features to his Patreon page, so there'll be a benefit to people who are watching on either channel. Kevin, I want to thank you so much, and I look forward to our conversation next week. I want to thank all of our generous Patreon sponsors, and we will carry on with this incredible new show that I'm so pleased to have you with me on.
Thank you, Jason.
Have a great night, Kevin, and thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you next week, and I'll see you tomorrow.